So good afternoon, everyone. So welcome to our System Engineer Ezra seminar series, and from you've been coming to many of these talks. But today, I think this talk is really special, as you will find out. Right, a lot of your system engineers or you're interested in system engineering, and you're always talking about looking at complex systems. So and you want to shape the complex system towards the better side. And of course, you think about human beings, and we are a complex system. And how do we shape human beings towards the better state? And I think that actually comes to engineer education. So actually, Dr. Alexandra Coso, and she works right at the intersection of engineer education, faculty development, as well as a complex system design. Right? I think it's really a holistic approach looking at that, because at the end of the day, either it's products or processes we're designing, but it's all going to be done by humans, at least today. In the future there might be AI and robotics, but today, and I believe in the future the majority of the things are still going to be creatively by human beings. So actually, this is really a very nice talk. Actually, Dr. Strong, and she came to Cornell. This is the first semester of her time here, and we are so excited. She's jointly appointed with the School of Chemical and Biomedical Engineering, as well as System Engineering. And I believe Dr. Strong, she's designing a course on human-centered design, which we wanted for many years. Alex, she did. She got her career award, and also before she came to Cornell, she at Florida International University, she and I believe you built 2 new programs, and that's really amazing. And then of course before that, that she also she did her undergrad study at MIT, and I believe it was in aerospace engineering, and then she went on to Virginia Tech, where I think she studied system engineering, and then in her PhD study, I think she moved back to aerospace engineering, and at the Georgia Tech. Along the way, she has accumulated all different kinds of awards and also the prizes. But today, you see that she's going to talk to us about individual actions towards changing in complex systems. I mean, this is so fundamentally important. Either I think in the academic environment, in the industry, practice, and even I think at the organizational level, when you are thinking about the changes, it all starts with individual actions. So without further ado, Alex, please.
Thank you. And see, Oliver already gave like the whole first 5 slides, so we can just move on. Does that sound good? All right, so a couple quick notes. First off, good afternoon, happy Friday. Thank you all for being here. I super appreciate it. I'm very much looking forward to having this conversation with you, and I use the word conversation very intentionally because I want you to also have a chance to engage and think about the complex systems that matter to you, your career, what you're currently doing in the program you're in. I want you to be able to have kind of that reflection time. So with that in mind, and this includes the folks who are on Zoom, I want everyone to make sure they have a sheet of paper with them. So I'm going to move some to kind of the middle. So when we get started with some of the activities, make sure you have a sheet of paper and a pencil, because or a pen. This is your chance to kind of connect what I'm talking about to the systems that matter to you. So this discussion today is really going to start from the following question, and we're going to see if this still works. Okay, so I want to pose this question to you. I'm going to mention that it's long, but we're going to break it down. So how might we make visible and expand on the moves we have available to us in our pursuit of change in complex systems? So if you're looking at that question, you're going, wait a second, you're already starting off with too many words. I'm not understanding. Let's reframe it a different way. What I want to ask today is, what is possible if we focus on individual actions towards change? If we think about what each one of us as individuals can do to affect change, to have an impact in our particular spaces. All right. So for the discussion today, I'm picking a particular system that many of us, especially those in engineering programs, in systems engineering here, we are intimately knowledgeable of. So we're going to use the complex system that is engineering education to frame our discussion. So we can all start from kind of the similar point, because we're all living either like in the broader higher ed or specifically within an engineering discipline. And we know that the system we're part of affects not only the career pathways and future work of all of you, but all of us faculty and staff in the room and online. It affects us too. What are our careers going to look like? What impact are we going to have on the world? And this system is also very influenced by outside external factors. Things that are going on locally, things that are going on in the state, things that are going on in other parts of the university, things that are going on nationally and internationally affect the education system. The other key part and reason that I wanted to use, not only from my own work, but I wanted to use this as an example with you all today, is that the calls for change in engineering education are ongoing. They were here long before I started undergrad, and they will be here long after my career is over. There are things we need to improve on. How courses are being taught, how students move through a curriculum, how we support students from all different backgrounds coming into engineering education, and then how we support their lifelong learning after. So with this in mind, kind of with this framing, we're gonna I want us to think about what does it mean if we want to change engineering education, where might we start? What could we do? So now I want you all to think about who has been taking, is anyone in here in like a systems dynamics class this semester? Anyone doing some modeling-based systems? Anyone in those spaces? Okay, I want you to think in your courses, go ahead and start coming up with that list in your head of what are ways we can change a system, right? So we can do a policy route, right? We could create some policy. Maybe it's local to a department of engineering, maybe at the university level or in the graduate school, or maybe it's at the state or the national level. We could modify a policy and we could have change happen. All right, what about processes? Okay, for those of us who think about things like manufacturing or supply chain, this is another way to effect change. We can optimize a process, maybe we can modify it, maybe we can actually write it down. For those of us faculty, we have experienced many times where there is no process. And if you would just write it down for us, it would make our lives a little easier. The other option is technological solutions. So in the education space, we've had a lot of discussions about generative AI. Many of you might be working in that space or considering moving into that space. We've talked about VR in the classroom. What would happen if we brought virtual reality, forms of personalized learning, other solutions? We could also just say, let's acquire some resources, right? So let's go find some funding, let's hire people, let's have more students in our classes to increase tuition and enrollment. Let's build a new building. That's another way to affect change. And as another one, and one that Oliver mentioned, is that I was a part of, is actually creating new programs. I have worked at an institution that was founded since the year 2000, and I helped establish 2 different degree programs. That's another way to affect change. We can try something new in a new space. All right, if we think about all these different ways of change, they have something in common. They are all relying on the actions of one or more individuals. If you build a new building, some things will change, but will the actions of the individuals change? If you enact a policy, will everyone follow it? There are questions here. What happens when we think about the individual? So that's what we're going to do today. So we are going to reframe our question a little bit. We are going to be thinking about how we might make visible and expand on the moves we have available to us as individuals in our pursuit of impact in engineering education. So what we're doing here is we're flipping the discussion. We talked about change, and change can come from all different directions. But for us as individuals, we're not always thinking about change. So for instance, let's say we always run 5 minutes late to class. We could say, we need to change our morning routine so we are no longer late for class. That feels very like, okay, yeah, I'm being kind of forced to do it by others, I need to change. But what if we said, we want to have an impact on our morning? We want to make our morning feel more relaxed. We want to show up for class ready and calm, not rushing through the door or up the stairs. So impact, when we think about how we support change, and we think about the individual level, this term actually resonates with a lot more individuals. And you'll kind of notice as we go through. I think it's important though, as I said, this question is kind of wordy, to break it down for you. So what I wanted to do at this point is I wanted to pause and kind of give you an example of the assumptions I'm making going into the rest of this talk and what we're going to actually be talking about and reflecting on. So first, I already shared with you that one of my big assumptions is that engineering education is a complex system for the reasons I explained before. A second big assumption is that calls for change are ongoing, we said that, but also the part of this use of impact is that impact is a really big motivating factor for individuals. If you talk to faculty about their research, they want to have an impact on the world. They want to have an impact in their field. If we're talking about students, you all are graduating, what do you want to do next? You're going to impact your life, you might be going out to impact other systems. It's a motivating factor for you. The next core assumption of kind of why this question is worded this way and how we're moving into the talk is that our actions, what I'm going to suggest is that our actions or inactions are embedded in a larger complex context, often hiding patterns that we or others can learn from. I gave you the example of being late for class. If you made a change to your morning routine, came in more relaxed, and arrived to class, you would know what you did to make that change. But me as your faculty member, as your professor, I don't know what you did. I'm not noticing that maybe 10 of you are meeting to go on a morning run at 5 a.m. And you've gone on your morning run, you all go for coffee together, you all come in really happy. I have no idea. All I see is that you all are now showing up on time. So oftentimes, even if we're seeing an outcome that's positive, we don't know how we got there. So we're going to talk about that piece. And then lastly, what I want to suggest and the idea that we're going to really talk about today is this idea that our decisions on what actions to take are influenced by what we individually view as available. We're going to break that down today. All right? Here are my assumptions going in. But there's one more. So the work that I do uses both qualitative and quantitative research methods. And when I go and I conduct my projects, whether I'm using a quantitative method or a model, or I'm using a qualitative method, interviews, observations, I come in with my biases and assumptions to that work. I'm a person, I have prior experiences, right? I come from an aerospace and systems background. I naturally look at the world as a system, as a series of systems and complex systems. I also come from a design background. I'm constantly thinking about human-centered design. Who are all the individuals affected or who are affected by? And this really comes from these prior experiences. So I wanted to briefly share a little bit about myself so you know as we go through this conversation that you understand kind of where I'm coming from and maybe how I got to some of the conclusions we'll share. So as was mentioned, some of my work is really affected by my undergraduate engineering education experience in aerospace at MIT, and my graduate experiences in systems engineering and aerospace as part of a human factors lab. A lot of my focus, my goal to have an impact comes from having experienced engineering education, having challenges, having successes, building support networks. A lot of this is affecting those impact goals. My questions around how could we integrate human-centered design into aerospace engineering or complex systems design curricula, that comes from here. You all have that too. Your prior experiences are affecting where you want to go next. Another part of my journey that has influenced my work on faculty, so I do a lot of projects looking at the role faculty play in change within higher education. And it comes from my experiences at a brand new institution at Olin College, which had been founded in the early 2000s, and then later as a faculty member at Florida International University, creating these 2-degree programs. The other piece of this that I have kind of seen along the way is the more I've gotten into these questions and these areas of impact in engineering ed, is recognizing that there are a lot of outside influences on engineering education. K-12, here in the United States, also internationally, and engineering practice, which is affected by you all when you graduate and you go out into engineering. You are changing engineering practice, which is then affecting what we're doing in education. Why do we have a Master's of Engineering in Systems Engineering? That comes from understanding what's going on in industry and how we can better support people's lifelong learning. All of this plays a role. So I've conducted work in engineering practice with engineers, trying to understand what they do, how they collaborate, communicate, and that's affected how I teach and the type of work I do, my research in higher ed. And then lastly, as you'll notice in my work, I talk a lot about context, because I recognize that higher ed and all of these components are embedded in society and policy and the environment. They affect what we're doing, and we affect them right back, okay? So this is where we're headed today. I'm gonna go ahead and give you a warning. I'm about to ask you to do something, so if you don't have paper, I want you to grab it. And then the second part is, I'm gonna talk about a lot of different approaches that I do for my research, but I'm not gonna go in depth. If we had 3 hours, we could all hang out together with a lot of snacks and coffee breaks, I could do that. It's not gonna happen today. So what I'm gonna ask of you is, if you have questions at the end on the research approach, on the methods that I picked and made, feel free to ask them. I'm totally ready to have that conversation. You can also feel free to email me. I included my email on the last slide. Sound good? All right, here we go. Are you all ready to do something? Okay, I want you to start to think about the ways you want to impact a complex system you are part of. This could be in your role as a student. Maybe you are a leader of a student organization. Maybe you're trying to change the way community is being built within a program. Or maybe it's part of where you're going next. Maybe part of this career change is to have an impact somewhere else. So start to think about that. And how we're gonna have you think about it is, I want you to take your sheet of paper, and I'm gonna have you at the very bottom, humor me for this. At the very bottom, I want you to write 2 or 3 areas where you pursue impact. My faculty in the room and on Zoom, I would like you to focus on engineering education, please. So think of where you want to have an impact in engineering education. For the students and the postdocs, you all get to pick whatever complex system you want to focus on. So where do you want to have an impact? And I want you to think about work that you're already doing in that space, right? So if your impact is, I want to have a sustainable world, think about, are you already doing some work in that space, whether in a class or in your Eng project or somewhere else, okay? So 2 or 3 areas where you are currently pursuing impact or will be in the future. So I see confused looks. Any questions before I give you a good minute of quiet time? Who would like an example? All right, take a minute or 2. Where are you pursuing impact? And again, humor me and write it on the bottom. There is a method. Once you've written down at least one, that's a win, because that's where we're going. So what I'm going to have you do is, I'm going to have you pick one to work on today. And I want you to pick one where you have taken an action towards that goal. So the example I gave is, maybe I want to create an inclusive research group culture for my team. I'm building a team here at Cornell. I want to create this inclusive group culture. And so I'm going to write down one action I took towards that. Okay? And so notice that the paper, things are in a certain place. So try to put it in kind of that second half of the paper. What's one action you took towards that goal? as you're writing your action, for those who've written it, I want you to start to think about what happened after. So if my goal was to have a discussion with some of my colleagues about what they do in their research group, what outcome did that produce? Like, what happened after that? I had a list. What feedback did I receive about it? And so what I mean by feedback is, let's say, for example, I had a discussion with some former students about what they felt was helpful to have an inclusive research group. Maybe the feedback I received is, it's really not about my role as faculty, it's also about, or it's not just about my role as the faculty member, it's about the students as well. Right, so what feedback was I receiving from other people? And then how did you feel about your action and the outcome? Right, and if those of you who are not in the, I don't really want to write today, you can draw what you're thinking, how you felt. So you took an action, what happened? Did you receive any feedback? What was it? How did you feel about it? Again, you're going for what happened, what feedback, and how did you feel about it? We'll come back to these two, so if you want to think some more, you can. Okay, so we're going to come back to this, we're not done. So if you're still writing, what happened, what feedback, and how did you feel about it? So let's now dig into this. And what we're going to do is I'm going to use two different research studies that I've done. And I'm going to share with you a little bit about what we've learned along the way. So I mentioned this before in the context of the question, this idea of what is available to us. So from my research, what we found when we started to ask questions around how people are taking individual actions towards impact, we realized something interesting was happening. And I'm going to share with you an example and have you kind of think through what that means and then give you what our definition was. So I want to introduce you to Lady, which is a pseudonym, it's not her actual name, of one of the participants on our research project. Lady is a faculty member, she's an instructional faculty member at a Hispanic serving institution in the state of Florida. She has a lot of departmental support for her teaching and the work she's doing in the classroom, and she really came back after getting her PhD. She had worked in industry for a long time, came back, got her PhD, and wanted to be the person that affected and supported her students achieving their goals. She had been asked at the time to teach what's considered a fundamental or foundational course in the engineering curriculum. So for those of you who had an engineering undergrad, I want you to think about that first engineering class that some people might have said was the weed out class, high theory, it's the really hard one. That was the one she was in, all those concerns. And she noticed when teaching this class that students really struggled to visualize the concepts in the course, okay? So what could she do? So in your mind, I want you to just think of a couple things that you think she could do. Capture one or two. Students are struggling to visualize the concepts. All right, partner up with somebody next to you and share what you found. What could she do? Share one idea.
We can hear now. So what do you think?
Instead of engineering classes,
I like that idea, and also in the context of that idea a little further. It is nice probably to arrange the student for on-site visit. On-site visit for either construction site or manufacturing manufacturing facilities.
All right, so I'm going to bring you back together because we don't have unlimited time. And I want you to just take a moment and note to yourself, did the person next to you have the same idea you did? Did the person next to you have the same idea that you had? Did you talk about, and then the second question is, did you take their idea and talk about how you might further improve on it? Oh, notice that. All right, so the idea here is that we've developed in our research, we noticed exactly what I just said, that the person sitting next to you saw different options or ideas than you did. And we partially defined this concept of available moves based on that idea. So what we noticed is that available moves were really this inner dialogue that happens, so the dialogue that's happening in our head, as we're seeking to figure out what possible actions could we take, and then choose which one to act on. So in the context of making a decision in the classroom, what commonly happens with faculty is we might say, oh, my students are struggling to visualize the concept. I should do more example problems in class. And then all of a sudden our dialogue says, but I don't have time. I have to cover this content. There's not enough time in the next class. In the concept of our morning scenario that we were talking about changing our morning routine, you might say, oh, I could wake up earlier. And then that inner dialogue in your brain goes, but I'm going to bed already at 1 in the morning and I need my sleep. So you're evaluating potential options and saying that option is not available. This option might be an option that I could do. What's curious about this is that we started to notice in our work that everyone was coming up with a different number of options and different types of options based on our prior experiences and how we understood the current situation. And I overheard many people talking about, well, it really depends what type of content they're struggling to visualize, like how you're reading that situation. And what's interesting is we didn't tend to see the whole set of available moves. And you all just experienced that happening. There was more than you came up with in 15 seconds. And even when we're faced with a very difficult scenario, oftentimes what happens is we won't see the complete set based on our past experiences, based on what we see as available. So we found one of the greatest influences is our professional capital, which translates to everyone in this room. The other people in your classes, the faculty members that you work with, the people that you're connected to in conferences or in your job, they're your professional capital, and they can help expose you to other possible options or help you evaluate them differently. So the study that I'm referring to was completed, we finished the project in 2022. It was a 7-year-long project that really tried to understand for brand new, for individuals transitioning into engineering education, so as a field, faculty positions, how they were trying to pursue impact in areas that mattered to them, and what was influencing their experiences. So in this project, we started by saying, hey, we need a model, we need something, we need some theory to help us build on how we're trying to understand our experiences. And so in the context of a very qualitative research project, we leveraged, and a social science research project essentially, what we were doing is leveraging theories of human behavior. One of those is this idea of agency. We define on this project agency as taking intentional or strategic actions towards a goal that mattered to us. So for our faculty and structures, since the study was focused on faculty, this could be taking an action towards redesigning their course, or, for example, advocating for well-defined promotion criteria in the context of our jobs. You can see this translating to your experiences as engineers in a company. Maybe take an action towards getting your group more resources, or taking an action towards supporting your own professional development by coming and getting a graduate degree. Those are all you exercising your agency. So in this project, we were 6 early career engineering ed faculty, and we used, as I mentioned, qualitative methodologies as part of a longitudinal study to focus on our transitions. Again, I'm not going to go into details, but we used 2 different methods to answer the intersection of 2 questions. So first was, how can we pursue our impact in our positions? How can we achieve the change we want to see in the world? And we used a method called collaborative inquiry. And then we used a method called collaborative autoethnography, which again is a collaborative qualitative methodology, to answer the question of what is influencing our agency, what is influencing our ability to take these actions to pursue impact. So we wanted to understand how can we do it, and then what's influencing it. So what we came to as a result, I started with this idea of available moves. So you can imagine like the football coach or the coach of the sporting event laying out what moves you can make, what play can you do, which play is the best play to move forward with. That's here. And the fact that that's influenced by our professional capital. And so what we looked at is we said, hey, we're doing something in our minds here. We're having this inner dialogue. And then we're deciding which action to take or not take. That's strategic actions. But as I mentioned, we also looked at those influences. Because there was something driving, not just professional capital, but something driving the differences in how we approached these various situations. And the influences that we came to, so this is kind of coming to our final, essentially our model that we came up with by conducting this longitudinal study to understand what influenced how we thought about what was available, what our actions could be, and what actions we took. So the first influence, I'll give you an example from one of the faculty members. So Avery was reflecting on what excited her most about her new position. She said, trying new things and learning from others. I'm excited to just listen and learn from the other faculty and the students. So Avery's telling you a bit about herself. She's saying, I like to try new things. I like to learn from other people. That was going to affect the type of moves she thought was available. When she might have seen students struggling with a concept, she would say, this is an opportunity for me to learn. I'm going to go talk to other faculty and learn from them, and then come back and try something new in my class. If someone is not super excited about trying new things, they might not see those moves as available. So this is starting to ask the question, and you can think about this in the context of what you have on your sheet, around what are your personal goals, values, what are you confident in, where do you see your skills and your strengths? And I promise I'm going to make you all answer these questions shortly. All right, then another influence, what we call the situation. And so here, Riley's reflecting on short-term challenges she expects to face in her position. She says, getting to know each of the key players. I'm in a position where it's hard to meet people. I also think the research is going to be very challenging, going to fall to the wayside as I need to get a handle on my courses and curriculum. So she's analyzing her situation. Essentially what she's doing is she's answering the questions of where is she right now, what position is she in, and what is going on in her institution, her discipline, or in the world that might influence her actions. We did this project through 2020. There were a lot of things influencing our situation, and that's what we saw as available. The last one, and this was something we found really fascinating because we were expecting this. We were expecting to say our situation matters. Who we are as people matter, and how we're taking action towards things that are goals to have impact. This one came out of the research and emerged completely unexpectedly. So Nova talks about her pathway into her current faculty position. She says, in addition to being a faculty member, I have an assistant director position at my institution. Since I ultimately want to have the opportunity to help students through my research and actual interactions, being able to keep a foot in both worlds, i.e. the center and her department, was important to me when considering positions, or essentially which faculty position to take. And what's interesting here is what this quote is kind of telling us is how we might define who we are in our role and our broader context changes based on the situation. You've still had the same past experiences, but if we said, okay, instead of being in this graduate program, you're actually working right now. Are you gonna be the exact same? Are you gonna have the same influences? No, because now you're in a company and your day-to-day is different, your demands are different, and that interaction term, essentially, creates some very interesting influences on what you do. All right, so let's go back to our diagram. Let's think about our influences. What influenced the action you chose to take? And what other options did you consider? So why did you take that action that you wrote down? Did you take it because you had a previous experience that said it was a good idea? Did you talk to someone about it? Was there something in the situation or who you are right now? Did you consider other options? So make a note on your sheet. What influenced the action that you took? And also make note if you considered other options. Maybe you considered not taking an action at all. Maybe you considered something else. And after you've written that down, I want you to start to notice, are there connections between what happened after and possibly the influences? Are there connections to what you might do next? I want you to think about something you're noticing on your sheet. What connections are you seeing between what influenced you, what other options you considered, and also what happened after? Or maybe what might happen next. If we have time at the end, we're gonna share these with our partner, share this with someone around us, but I wanna have you just think about this, and as I give you the example, see if you can add anything. So in our model that we came up with, we noticed that outcomes matter, and I already asked you these questions, but I wanna share this briefly here. What we noticed is that after you take an action, you've taken an action, something happens. Sometimes you can define it, sometimes you can't, right? And I think about this a lot in my teaching. We just did this activity. I don't know what the output is from your own individual experiences without talking to you and getting to know. I don't know if there's gonna be an outcome today, tomorrow, maybe in a year that comes from having done this activity and proposed this to you all. So this sometimes is unknown, but there's two things that are known as an outcome. One is how I feel, right? How you feel after taking the action, and the other is the feedback that you receive. People looking confused, people coming up after and saying, nope, I don't know why you had us do this. That's fine, I need that feedback, help me out. The thing that's interesting there is that then affects the person, their situation potentially, and also what they choose to view as available next time. If I get up in a class and I share with my students to help visualize a concept, a new example, and half my class is asleep, you think I'm going to do that again? Probably not, right? So that feedback is affecting how we evaluate future available moves. So let's see how it affected our person that we talked about before, our faculty member, Lady, by sharing with you very briefly. So this was the other project that I was mentioning that really focused on understanding teaching track faculty at Hispanic serving institutions. So this is an ongoing project, and we've been trying to understand kind of what is supporting their ability to affect change in their roles, to have impact. So we conducted an action research approach. Again, happy to talk about the methods at a different point or after. But what that meant is at the very beginning, we needed to understand who these instructional faculty were. So we conducted semi-structured interviews with 17 faculty from Texas and Florida. And we wanted to know about their pathway into their current role, what responsibilities they had, how they approached their teaching, things that might affect their ability to affect change. And so let's go back to Lady. So I mentioned before that she was trying to figure out what to do. What's fascinating is before she even got to this thought bubble, is she went into her class and she tried demos. She got some feedback, she learned from it. Then she went out and looked at the research, couldn't find anything. She went out and tried online tools. That didn't seem to work. And so she came up with this idea after multiple times of trying other things and said, augmented reality might be beneficial. I know our communications department teaches gaming design. Maybe they could help. So she went to the communications department, and this was the quote she gave in the interview. They had no interest in working with me. I kind of gave up on that dream. So what you're seeing here is the feedback she got affected that available move. She wasn't going to do that anymore. It affected her and her situation. But the fascinating part is that it didn't affect it forever. And that's what we saw with a lot of our faculty. She tried other things in the classroom, but she didn't actually give up on that dream. 2 years went by, and an opportunity for some funding became available at the institution to pursue an innovation in someone's course. She applied for the funding, was successful, and is now partnered with a local company to bring augmented reality to her class. She adapted. And so on our project, we're exploring these narratives and finding other ways that faculty are engaging and having an impact in their roles. So all coming back. So we've talked about this concept of available moves. We've talked about this idea of how, as we're connecting with other people, as we're experiencing things, what we view as available changes. Why does this matter in complex systems? We're one person. It matters because it affects what our actions are. So what I have found across 2 different projects is that there are many ways that people choose to pursue impact. So if my goal is to change the way engineering education is taught, change the experiences of students, I need to recognize that individual people have different goals. That seems pretty fair. The second part is that there's a diversity of influences on our decisions to pursue impact. So if I say to you all, I want you all to be going to class on time tomorrow, it's an 8 a.m. class, you're all gonna be there, so you all need to wake up at 6 a.m. How do you think that's gonna work? Pretty well, right? You're all gonna wake up right at 6 and get moving and do your morning run? No, because there are influences on your decisions. You all have lives outside of this moment in time, correct? So if I'm trying to promote individual action towards change, I need to recognize that we're influenced by different things. The other key part is our decisions about what actions to take are influenced by what we view as available. I want you to think about your undergrad education for a moment, and think about what happened when maybe you didn't receive a grade you got, or maybe you had a challenge on your team and a team project, or maybe something just wasn't going right. Did you always go talk to your professor? You're each having individual reactions to this, so pay attention to that. I have found it fascinating in working with students, including and thinking about my own experience, how many times I didn't view that option as available, and then what instances I did. Where I said, "Ooh, I should go to the faculty member and tell them what's going on. Maybe I could get some help." It's interesting what we view as an option that we can actually consider. And so again, if I'm trying to promote change in a complex system, I need to understand that some folks don't see that one pathway as an option they can take. How do I help them see that? And then the last part is to foster an environment in engineering ed specifically that supports faculty, students, and staff pursuing impact. We have an opportunity to learn from one another to identify a broader set of available moves for everyone. We're currently working on a project in chemical and biomolecular engineering and CBE here at Cornell, and we're having faculty members propose different ways they could do something in a classroom to create an entire repository of all the options they might, not even all, it won't be the complete set, but a large number of options that could be available to them. And then they get to pick and choose what they want to do towards the same goal. I'm giving them choice, we're giving them options, we're showing them what's available. So if we want to affect change in complex systems, education or otherwise, it's important to recognize that individual actions matter, and we can actually support individual actions if we think about people as individuals, coming with prior experience in diverse situations, and in some cases, not recognizing that an option is indeed an option they can take. All right, so again, this is just a brief overview of some of the work that I've been doing. I just wanted to say if you're interested in learning more, there are graduate research opportunities in engineering education at Cornell. There's 3 of us faculty members who do research in this area. I think many of you already heard from Dr. Allison Godwin earlier this semester. And there's also Dr. Alexandra Worth, who's in BME, does some great work on teamwork and collaboration in engineering. There's also, for those of you who are in PhD programs and wrapping up, and this is something that you're like, well, maybe I want to do something like this. There's the CIDR postdoctoral fellowship program here at Cornell that's just kicking off. And there are 3 postdocs that we are hiring for the coming year. And then lastly, as Oliver mentioned, I am teaching a class in the spring. Human-centered design for change in complex systems. It's not going to be, education would only be one of many examples that we explore. We're going to look at things in health systems and energy, and also in your own areas of interest. You'll have a chance to define some of the complex systems we look at. It's going to be offered on Mondays and Wednesdays in the spring. All right? So with that, I'm going to just say thank you. I'll take questions, but I'll leave the course up there too. Thank you very much. I know we don't have any time, but if there's 1 or 2, if anyone has any questions. Yes.
It's wonderful to get to hear more about your work, and glad to have you in the program. I couldn't help but notice this reminds me a lot of process tracing from the social sciences of, and I wondered, has there been any intersection there? Because I can imagine those methods working well together.
Yeah, so we didn't use process tracing, but we're continuing. So I have a new project that's going to pick up with some parts of this. And so I'm trying to pull from other methods to see what's going to be most appropriate. So that's one I'm going to be looking into more. But we essentially did very similar things. So to get not Lady's narrative that I shared with you, but to actually develop the model, we did something that we called cascading narratives. And which is very similar to process training, we looked backwards to say, based on this particular where we are now, how did we get here? And so we walked through and got to watch how the feedback impacted us, how our personal reactions impacted us, looking at data across a 4-year time period, and kind of picking up what was influencing other things. So there's some similarities, but we didn't use it, but I definitely want to look into it more.
Does that mean following up with the peers of the respondents?
So it was just the respondent. So we took a very individual centric, the individual's perception, because we wanted to understand, if we want to change individual behavior, we need to understand what their perception is of what's happening and what's influencing them. And so we started with the endpoint. So let's say, for example, I'm here at Cornell University. What got me here? What decisions, what actions did I take to get here? What was influencing each of those actions? And then what action affected that before action? And so we essentially created these what we kind of called movies or episodes of people's lives and how they got to certain points. And it was very fascinating to watch the stories come together and they all connected, like we used it to kind of test and verify our model. Yeah. Yes.
I was just wondering if you sometimes like see like that institution as like an individual with like certain agency, like cause
Yeah, so I don't do work on institutional agency yet, always the future, right? But institutional agency is a thing that people talk about, like the role of the institution and how it chooses to act or not act in a given scenario. But what I find really fascinating from that work is that they take such a high level perspective that we sometimes miss why did that one individual, like an institution is acted on or acts based on individual action. So I was focusing more on that, but there are folks who are thinking about when organizations make decisions or move forward at that level, what is affecting those decisions that they're making. Yeah, there's a lot of really interesting work around kind of organizational change, but also in the leadership space that looks at the organization as a leader, and so they take kind of that, they humanize an organization or institution. I know it's past time, I should let you all know. Thank you all so much. Oh, but yes, I can take more questions. Do you want me to let them go or take one more?
That's fine because we do have some time. Yes.
Oh, we do, okay,
Yes.
go ahead.
Hi, thank you very much for your time. It's very interesting. From a system engineering standpoint, we set goals and we figure out ways to measure things and collect data.
Yes.
So you can obviously find out if your goals are being affected or not.
Mhm.
Well, what's your primary go-to for collecting that data?
So
feedback?
it entirely depends on the question. So here I presented two studies that are entirely qualitative. So how did we collect data? We did individual reflection. So we had people reflect on certain sets of questions on a weekly basis for 4 years. We conducted interviews. We had focus group, group sense-making discussions. On the other project, it was entirely interviews. So usually I use those approaches when I'm looking for really rich, nuanced data. So I don't have necessarily such a quantitative metric that I'm aiming for. I really want to understand the nuances, the whys behind people's actions. What was cool is, so on the project with the model, we then used what we found in the model and what we collected, what we saw in the data, to create a survey instrument to actually measure the actions that people were taking. Like how much across all these different faculty roles, what percentage of faculty were taking actions towards certain types of impact. And we used our qualitative data to populate the items in the instrument that we used. So I use different methods based on the question, but it depends on if I'm looking for really nuanced why or if I'm looking for more generalizable things. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so if you were gonna do this analysis on our department,
Yeah.
or semi-department, sorry.
A program.
A program. Yeah, so you're looking for measurable things, but for a shorter amount of time. No, 4 years is a long time.
Yeah, so that was a very foundational study.
Yeah, so you want to kind of break this up into shorter periods. Know what you're looking at, and then the next year maybe modify those things. Is that the way you'd kind of do it?
Well,
So you can summarize your data as you go?
So I think what I would do is I would start with asking the question of why am I doing this to begin with? So if I was studying, for example, the systems engineering program,
Okay.
I would probably be meeting with the faculty and the staff and say, what do we want to know? What are we trying to look for? Is there a specific goal? Is there something?
Right.
And then use that to sort of back out how much data to collect, when to collect the data, recognizing that if I ask faculty during the time they're grading exams to do an 1.5-hour long interview with me, I'm not going to get what I want, right? They're going to be influenced by the context and when things are happening. So I would definitely think a lot about the goal and back out the method to do that. But yes, this framework, we're playing with different ways to collect quantitative data. So like survey a high amount of people filling it out, but we're focusing in on when we use that instrument, what are we actually trying to measure?
Right.
So in that context.
That may change.
And that may change. And so we're actually doing it for that instructional faculty project. We're turning some of this model into a quantitative instrument. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to measure we're looking at influences and feedback. And so we want to understand, do these faculty across all these institutions have the same influences and the same feedback, or are there clusters of certain types of influences that seem to group together, or certain types of feedback that group together?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes.
Thank you for your presentation. I've heard about the model that you're developing that in each group of people you're studying, but the things that after you develop the model, are you giving back to people and acts as a consulting thing to people?
So you know what you just did with the activity?
Yeah.
That's what I was doing. So what's fascinating is I've taken this, and what it's technically called, what we made, was a contextualized theory, right? So it's not a full-blown theory, because we know theory has to be tested, but the method we used created what's called a contextualized theory, so a theory that's embedded in the context of the people that were part of the study. So we're not saying it's generalizable to everybody. So what we've been doing with it is we've been taking it around and kind of shopping it in different contexts. So I've gone to faculty development workshops where I've talked to faculty about their agency. I've helped them engage in discussions about, well, what is available? If students are struggling to visualize the content, let's notice, what is everyone saying possible moves are? Why are some available and not others in certain contexts? And using it to kind of talk about some of these issues related to teaching and learning with students. And in a seminar like this, the idea is to just have you reflect on language or concepts that could be powerful to you. So what I have tended to find in this research is when we give concepts a name, when we name available moves, we're now, when we come to a situation, we're now asking ourselves reflective questions that we might not have before. We still might have, some folks are very self-reflective and really think through, but for others, having that language can really help change their decision-making process and affect it in a critically reflective way. So that's the idea. But yeah, so we're introducing this into different contexts in a way to start some discussions, and across other projects, using it as appropriate. It is not appropriate for everything, but it's appropriate to have some good conversation at least.
So, follow-up question,
Yes.
that the model is consisting of many questions, you're designing those questions to follow things.
Yeah.
Is it just a complex package of questions and all the things? Is it, how does the model look like?
Oh, what does the model look like? So I would have to ask the graduate student who has been playing with this. So there's a graduate student at the University of Texas, El Paso, Henry Salgado, and he is taking this model that we've looked at qualitatively with our sample first. So we developed it qualitatively with one sample. We took it to another sample and said, does this actually fit with these individuals when we do in-depth interviews? And now we're asking the question of what happens when we generalize it to a broader sample of faculty that fit in this subset. So we're staying in our subset. And so he has been creating questions using what we saw in our interviews of that population and using the contextualized theory to then be able to create a structured equation model, eventually we will get there, of this agency kind of contextualized theory. And so we will not, there are things that might fall out, like we don't know. But that's what we're trying to do, having used the interview data to give it a little bit more evidence of validity, and yeah, so we'll see what happens. But he's been working on it and having fun with it, so that's cool.
Thanks.
Great. Alex, thanks you again.
Thank you.
Great.